Penn State fans, Bob Flounders, Max Ralph, Blue White Breakdown time. It's Monday, lunchtime. Max and I were talking off the air prior to the podcast about how it's nice that it's not in the mid 90s. And we don't want the mid 90s coming back for good reason. Penn State is less than 2 weeks away from its season opener against those darn Nevada Wolfpack at Beaver Stadium. 2 Saturdays from now. Max, how are you? Right, I said I wasn't gonna throw you a loop, but I just can't resist.
I expect it. Yeah.
Last time I saw, I think I checked yesterday, Sunday, Penn State minus 44 and a half. If, hypothetically, you had $1,000 to bet, but you had to bet on the game, you couldn't keep it. You have to bet it, and if you're right, you double your money. If you're wrong, buckus. 44 and a half. What say you? You can change your mind when we do our stuff next week. But right,
yeah, I was gonna say just right now, I'll take the under because
I did. Oh, okay. So you want the points?
I'm sorry. I thought that was the only
Penn
option.
State is a 44 and a half point favorite.
Yeah. Sorry, that's what I meant to say. I'll take Nevada on the points because look, week one, that's a massive point spread. I mean, 44 and a half is just unbelievable. I think Penn State is one of the best teams in the country. Yeah. I think Nevada lost most of the life they had in the transfer portal.
They did.
But 44 and a half points is still astronomical, and you have to account for the fact that it's week one. And nobody's running on full bore right now. So that's, we'll see. We'll see how we feel getting closer to the game. But right now, my $1,000 bet is probably taking the points for Nevada.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think I'm going to waver on that. I don't think the number's going to move. I just think if Penn State fans like to bet on Penn State. We've seen it over the late covers that Bo Prabula a few years ago pulled off. Like, they just get really into it. I think they covered late against West Virginia at home. In 2023, they covered late at Northwestern at 2023. It's actually a close game for a while. But Penn State fans are going to lay the points. Penn State fans, just know this. Oregon's coming sooner rather than later. It's the first game. I can't imagine they're going to show a lot. The other thing is that second half of that game, they're going to take long looks at some very raw players or players that they like. There's going to be some mistakes made. They're going to have to keep it simple. They could still cover the number. They could still win 56-0, but I just think there are a couple factors Max alluded to, the big number, that could be working against you. So just bear that in mind. And if you lay the points, good luck, but it could be tight.
Yeah,
right, Max?
Absolutely. It's Bob. Look, there's a reason. There are multiple reasons why I don't bet on Penn State games,
Sure.
But there are also reasons why I'm not a betting man. I'm not confident in these things. I know I give it my best shot when you ask me about it, but I can't call myself an expert.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get there with you. Don't worry. By the end of the year, you're going to feel like you are an expert. So, Max, like it is August 18th. There's still a couple of preseason practices left, but game week is almost here. I don't know how much more Penn State is trying to iron out these last couple of practices with the season almost here. But I think they only have a couple left, and then it is 1-0 Nevada week. I'm sure James will put it out Saturday or Sunday of this week. But it also struck me that really it's also the end of the offseason. You know what I mean? I still consider the preseason practices, I could still kind of fold them in to Penn State's offseason because there's some news, there's some intriguing news, stuff happens. So, but this is really it. I mean, once they start, it is in season time, and that's when it gets serious. But the reason I bring it up, Max, is I'm going to be writing on PennLive a little bit later this week some of the more underrated off-season storylines that have kind of struck my fancy, dating back to, they turned the page after Notre Dame beat them in the semifinal playoff, and there was a bevy of news, like fast and furious. I mean, recruiting, right? Transfer portal, coaching staff, all that stuff. And I want to focus on a couple that I think are not necessarily so obvious or come to mind right away, but I think they are significant. And I'm curious if they'll impact the season. So I have like 3 or 4 I wanted to discuss with you.
Okay.
And feel free to disagree with me or think if it's not, you don't think they're significant, they may not very well be, but I just remember when they happened and I've been thinking about them, then I'm like, hey man, I don't know that I saw this coming. So
yeah.
All right, here we go. They could almost go together, but it's up to you. So one of them for me is Jaywan Sider's departure and Stan Drayton's arrival and all that's kind of happened since then. I think it's pretty fascinating. I'll just start from my end, and you feel free to add on to it. There's a lot of layers to this because one of the things that jumps out to me is I think a lot of people thought when Sider left for Notre Dame, he might be bringing some guys with him. Like he had some great relationships. He's done a great job on the running back recruiting trail. And I know it could still play out that way, but there has not been really a lot of things that have hurt Penn State with him going to Notre Dame and Stan Drayton taking over the running backs. How do you look at that as maybe an underrated offseason storyline?
I think that's a great one because especially as far as coaching staff goes, Jim Knowles gets all the love,
right?
And rightfully so. I mean, that was a coup, right? But I think I've said this before. I think that having Stan Drayton in the fold, regardless of your feelings on him as a coach, can probably only be a good thing for Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen because, look, they had those 3 years with Jaywan Sider and 3 really productive years. They learned more or less everything that they probably were going to learn from him. I mean, there's only so much that one mind could come up with throughout a 4-year stretch. So it's fresh eyes. It's a guy who comes into the room, hasn't spent 3.5 years with those 2 running backs and says, hey, here's a hole in your game that I see that you might not have been able to see before just because you're so used to doing the same things over and over and over again. So I think when you get into the full impact of Stan Drayton, what this room looks like under him, recruiting and all that, you have to look beyond this season. But I think for this season, it's really, for the most part, a universal good for Nick Singleton and Kaytron Allen. And Bob, I know that we've talked about him a few times, whether it was post-practice 2 weeks ago, I think, or just on one of these podcasts. I've been really impressed with the guy. I think that he's a great presence in that room. No-nonsense kind of guy. I think that it's a little bit of a different style from Jaywan Sider, who did great things here. But I think that the presence of Stan Drayton has been welcome so far.
Yeah, and just like I said, he said it at his introductory press conference that the first thing he gravitated toward was, how can I get their weaknesses to be not weaknesses anymore? And it's, we're not talking about, incoming true freshmen or redshirt freshmen. We're talking about Nick has 2,000-yard seasons. Kaytron's just had the best Penn State season of his career. And he's like, look, if they want to be elite, like I know I'm going to find what they are and we're going to work on them. And it's kind of up to them. And then, 2 weeks ago, he talked about how he did it. He said, I showed him the tape and I pointed them out. It's tough love, but it's also important. And then we went to work on them. And he said he feels like it's been nothing but a positive experience for those 2 running backs. And I do think this, if they're healthy, knock on wood, it'll be their best years. And I think it's going to show up on the field. He talked about, the little things like anticipating, what the defense is going to do for a particular defensive alignment and Penn State play call, all that stuff. It makes sense to me. And lastly, the guy worked with Bijan Robinson, Zeke Elliott, and Brian Westbrook. So if you're Nick and Kaytron, you might want to pay attention. I just think it's an underrated hire. I don't know how long he'll be here. He's been to a lot of different places, but I think for this team and for those runners, and also for the young runners, right? The young runners are watching. Hey, he's coaching these guys hard, so we gotta pick it up. Yeah. I just think it's a really, really good hire, and I'm really curious to see how the running backs kind of look. It's not so much early in the season, but once the Big Ten schedule, beginning with Oregon, arrives. I think it's a very compelling storyline. And to your point, Max, Jim Knowles, hey, that's kind of an obvious one. I just wanted to focus a little bit more on some not so obvious ones. So before I get to my next one, though, now that you know what we're doing, is there one that jumps out to you? Maybe we're thinking the same way.
There is, Bob, and although I will say it doesn't necessarily have to do with this season specifically.
Sure.
And maybe it's not particularly unsung. I think potentially my reaction to it is in the minority, but I when I think about this offseason, I think heavily about Notre Dame stealing a boatload of top Penn State targets on the recruiting trail.
Yeah.
That obviously won't rear its head this year.
Some Pennsylvania kids too, right, Max?
Absolutely, yeah. Joey O'Brien, the top kid in the state by a lot of measures, is one of them. Kari Adams is a Maryland kid, but that almost might as well be an extension of Pennsylvania, the way James Franklin has recruited it over the past few years. And then Tyler Merrill as well, who we just profiled for our high school sports preview.
Okay.
And Grayson McKeo as well. There are a number of guys who are going over there that are, in the region for Penn State. And you wonder if maybe J1 Sider had something to do with that, considering he had the inroads already, having been at Penn State. But I think my reaction to that, when I say it's a little bit potentially in the minority, is like, it just doesn't matter that much. I think Penn State has maybe a little bit on the lower end of what we've become used to seeing from James Franklin recruiting classes right now. But I think there's a lot of talent in the 2026 class. And I think that, as we've seen with a guy like Nolan Rucci, if those guys go over there and they're not loving it at Notre Dame right away, Penn State has done a great job of maintaining relationships with guys beyond the recruiting process. I'm very much willing to bet that at least one of those guys that we classify a big loss for Penn State this summer is a Nittany Lion by the end of their career. So I think that, especially in today's day and age where NIL and the transfer portal are running rampant, I think that it's a little bit of an overreaction to say that the recruiting class is ruined by those things. And, like I said, I think those guys could absolutely become Penn Staters. I also think that in this era, based on the evidence we have so far, it's worth putting your trust in the model that James Franklin has started to run at Penn State, because, they've had guys stick it out and they've had successful teams so far.
Yeah, Max, to your point, you mentioned Nolan Rucci. That's a great example. I just think about a couple other, maybe they weren't as prominent. Chop Robinson left Maryland, and I think there was some definite interest from Penn State all along the recruiting trail. Yeah. He was just a magnificent player at Penn State. He's a guy that comes to mind. Another one, kind of AJ Harris. I mean, Georgia kid, but he's. I think they've talked about Terry had a relationship with him. They get him here. Good to go. Takes a big step. Probably going to take another big step this year. So you're right. If at first you don't succeed, if you're James Franklin, I think now this is almost like a backhanded compliment for him. If you don't get him right away and you're not really happy at your school and you want a second shot, like Penn State will commit to giving you that second shot if they liked you as a player.
100%. They've done a great job. I mean, honestly, the list goes on and on, because if you can see, like, almost every time Penn State picks a guy out of the transfer portal over the past 3-4 years, it's been somebody that they've recruited pretty heavily out of high school. So it's a trend. I think in college football's history, there has always been a little bit of overreaction about high school recruiting classes, because rankings, after all, are nothing but projections. But I especially think in today's day and age, and considering the context of Penn State losing a lot of PA kids to a rival school, I just think that maybe pump the brakes for right now is kind of my take on it.
Yep. Moving along here on the Blue-White Breakdown, looking at some potential, I think, underrated offseason storyline since Penn State unfortunately closed the door on their 2024 campaign with that loss to Notre Dame. A lot has happened.
Yeah.
With James Franklin's program. Just looking at a couple of not so obvious under the radar storylines. I'm just going to kind of go in like timeline order. Now this one I was on the fence about, but the more I thought about it, I think that I'm going to give this one a go. We don't have to talk a lot about it, but this might be on the low end of the spectrum for you. Jackson Smolik's spring game showing, and kind of how James Franklin, I believe, pivoted a little bit on maybe the timeline, I think, for the backup quarterback. Now, look, he was always probably not going to be in any hurry to make that call, but this Drew is the sand is running out of the hourglass for Drew Aller. As good as he's been, they got to kind of find a quarterback for the near future. And, Ethan Grunkemeyer was that guy at the end of last year, but Jackson Smolik missed the year with a long-term injury. Those were not ideal weather conditions in the spring game, and I know you couldn't hit the quarterback. That all impacted it, but you saw him make plays with his arm and his legs, and I think James used the word rusty. He expected him to be rusty in the game. He said that wasn't the case. Here we are now in late August, and I think James said it could play out for a while. That may well be the case, but I think things shifted a little bit with what Jackson was able to do maybe in the spring and especially in that blue-white game.
I think that's a fair point, Bob. I genuinely believe that as of right now, maybe by the time we leave practice Tuesday afternoon, we might have a different opinion. But I do genuinely believe right now that this is an open competition. And I think entering the blue-white game, a lot of us probably penciled Ethan Grunkemeyer automatically as quarterback 2. So I think you're right. I think Smolik really did get the better of Grunkemeyer in the spring game for what it's worth. You mentioned the weather conditions. The wind was howling that day. It was pretty.
To be outdoors covering a game.
Yeah, absolutely. But I say it over and over again. Ever since Smolik got on campus, he's gotten like unprompted nods from James Franklin for how well he throws the football. I don't think that Ethan Grunkemeyer has needed those because he had a higher prospect profile. We kind of expected that from him. But I think Smolik is definitely probably a little overlooked at times by us on the beat as well as the fan base. I don't know if he's going to be anything. I don't know if he's going to be the number 2 quarterback, but I think it's just worth mentioning throughout this that, yes, there is a genuine chance that he could be the number 2 right now because he did come back from the injury in a good way. One of the other things that I think is really interesting with him, Danny O'Brien, every time they go into their quarterback's room for meetings, he runs a little quiz on, playbook stuff, playbook adjacent stuff, whatever. And Smolik is the guy who's winning it all the time, like all the time. Somebody asked him right at the end of his press conference last week who's winning, and he just right away, it's Smolik. He's running away with it. So really smart kid, knows the playbook. That goes a long way, especially when you're talking about a backup quarterback competition, because once you get to that point, all you're really looking for is somebody to kind of steady the ship rather than go out and make huge plays. So certainly he's in it. I think it's a big storyline right now that kind of got born out of an overlooked storyline.
And it could be an even bigger one if something happens to Drew for, even if it's a game or they need, you think about the Wisconsin game last year, right? That, if they lose Drew, they're down at half. Jalen Roon has a nice pick 6, but they had Bo Prabula. They don't have Bo this year. So honestly, Max, if this is going to be a long season, I think at some point the backup quarterback's going to have to make some plays in a game. I don't think you can assume, Drew's going to be the guy from start to finish as big as he is. I mean, I do think, and I also want to say, I think it says a lot about Jackson to not, he has a significant injury. Mentally, that can't be great. James Franklin had a lot of nice things in season to say about Grunk, and deservedly so. The kid's a talented kid, but not every quarterback that's hurt responds the way I think that Jackson did. He got healthy. He hung in there. He had a great spring. He made some plays. He's got some confidence. And I just think that, not every athlete responds the way that he did. And I think it says a lot about him. You mentioned, he's paying attention. He's really good. He knows the stuff. He's got a lot going for him. So let's see how that plays out, Max. But I just think it would not surprise me if maybe there's a little bit of a surprise at some point with him. If not at Penn State, maybe somewhere else. So, Max, I got 2 more. Let's get to 2 more in sequential order. I think this is fairly under the radar only because everyone is just focusing on – a lot of people are focusing on the wideout transfers. And after the Ohio State and Notre Dame games last year, I certainly get it. But I just think that when Tamir Robinson was lost and Penn State was able to get Amari Campbell from North Carolina after spring, I think that's a pretty significant deal. They were a legit linebacker short, as much as they like their young guys. And for a team with championship expectations to now be able to have Three linebackers, I think they feel good about, even if they're going to play only two men a lot of the time. But I'm envisioning a two linebacker set of Rojas and Amari, and that secondary and those edge rushers. That's a really fast defense. I think it's a pretty big deal, and I think maybe when all is said and done, he could be the most significant transfer add.
Great point. I'm right there with you. I would probably say, though, based on what I've seen to this point, Trevor Pena is going to end up being the guy that is the most impactful transfer pickup. But Amari Campbell is going to be right there as like a number 2 or potentially even a 1B. And all those wide receivers are getting all the love from us too, as members of the media. I mean, like, we are going to keep writing about wide receivers until they prove us that we shouldn't be writing about wide receivers anymore. I mean, that's just the bottom line when you go in a national semifinal and don't have a guy make a single catch in the game. That's how it works. Yeah. So, yes, they are going to get all of the attention. But to your point, that means a guy like Amari Campbell, who really should be a major impact guy, doesn't get as much pub as he should. And he was productive. I think there are, you can make whatever points you want about the ACC, especially last year, maybe being a down year for the conference. You can talk about a North Carolina defense that didn't have a lot of bright spots, but I don't really care who you are when you put up 70-plus tackles and 10 tackles for loss.
Yep,
that's significant. Those are good numbers. If he can come in here and even just play 30 snaps a game and make a couple of tackles for loss, even if it's just on third downs and blitz packages, that's something Penn State needed. They did not have fantastic pass rushing depth at the linebacker position. Rojas can do it, but he's also probably better suited in coverage because of his athleticism. It's just, you're absolutely right. Huge ad, not being talked about enough by us. And the other point that I'd make is it takes a little bit of pressure off of the young guys too, because before his ad, you were looking at an Anthony Specca, Keon Wiley, and saying, you need to be in here. You need to be ready to play 30 snaps a game. Sure, they still want to be ready for that, and they probably will play in some capacity. But now they can go out there with a weight off their shoulders and probably just play with their hair on fire.
Yeah, Max, I don't think it was a coincidence that Jim Knowles singled out Amari Campbell after the first preseason practice. I mean, I think he hadn't had much of a look at him, but I don't think it's a coincidence that he did that. I think Jim Knowles is a very intentional guy. I think when he wants to make a point, he's not a man of many words. So whether it's the defender of the day or if he mentions somebody or he really talks glowingly about somebody that you don't necessarily expect, you better pay attention. The other thing is we were up there when James was asked about the green dot candidates, and Amari was one of 3. It's the 3 veteran linebackers. James was asked, but he wasn't here for the spring. Maybe he hasn't been here long enough. James is like, no. I mean, we're all learning a new defense. We're all kind of starting from that. We're all kind of starting over, but he basically said he was that guy for Carolina. So I just think all the evidence is there for him to be a very important player on the defense. I will be watching him very closely, especially against the better offenses that Penn State is going to play. Max, we've arrived at my final. I know you're broken up about this. We've arrived at my final under-the-radar offseason storyline. And look, it can't all be puppy dogs and ice cream. It can't all be good. So I think this is the one I just want to talk about, because I do think when you think about the end of last year and you think about where they are now and you think about what's being talked about, I'm going to go with Max Granville's long-term injury. I think you were up there in early June, and I think you wrote a story about it. I think James talked about it. I know they recruit well. I know they trust Deion Barnes. And I know they like a lot of younger edge guys, but the way people were kind of talking, and just veterans and James and all, the way they were talking about Max at the end of last year, had he been healthy, I'm not so sure that it wouldn't have been him opposite Deny and maybe a guy like Zariah, who they really like, but is coming off a long-term injury and not his first one. Maybe you can ease him in a little bit more, but he was definitely going to be a guy that we were going to see a lot of on the field. Time will tell, how much he will be missed. Maybe he won't be missed, but I just remember, and I know you remember, they were really, really liked him.
Yeah.
At the end of last year and in spring.
I mean, at worst, he was 3rd or 4th in that rotation. At worst, he could have been as high as number 2. And I mean, all that is just another guy you trust at that position, which right now, as we've, rehashed over and over, there are absolutely guys with talent. And the emergence of a guy like Chaz Coleman, who we've talked quite a bit about over the last week or two, that's big. And that could mean that this all ends up not mattering as much as it could. But, having a guy that you trust in a room where you already know you're thin on depth is really, really important. So, yeah, losing a guy like Max Granville, one of the biggest storylines of this offseason, in my opinion, because even before that, we thought it was going to be a thin position. Yeah. So I think getting after the passer this year is probably one of the keys for Penn State to reach its goals. I think, when you look at the totality of a team that's ranked number 2 in the country, that's the position you immediately point to and say, well, if they are solid there, they're probably, they don't have a whole lot of holes. So you're absolutely right, Bob. I'm right alongside you. I think that there are absolutely pieces in tow for Penn State to not have to worry about the Max Granville thing. They're there. Jalen Harvey, Chaz Coleman, Ivan Kamaju, those guys are young, promising talents. But Max Granville played quite a few snaps in the college football playoff run, and you just don't have that guy. Zariah Fisher didn't even play in the college football playoff run last year. So you're really leaning heavily on a lot of unknowns.
Max, I was one of the reasons I thought about him, and so I was looking at Joe Hermit, PennLive's Joe Hermit's pictures from everyone was allowed up, I think, either over the weekend, either on Saturday or Sunday. If it was like picture day, you get a picture of all the freshmen, you get a picture of anyone you want, and he has a shot of guys, I think, walking into the stadium or wherever it was, and Max was in uniform, and he looked. I mean, I know he's got a long-term injury, but he looked physically like a dude. He looks really, really imposing, and it just struck me that, man, if he was 100%, I don't think there's a chance on earth that he wouldn't be a huge impact player up front. But hopefully the long-term injury will heal. There won't be any ramifications. He'll be good to go whenever he's good to go, and he'll be, Max, I think we both know he'll be just a really big part of, whenever he's ready, he'll be a big part of the Penn State defense.
Yep, I'm in total agreement. Really bright kid, too. A couple of times we've gotten a chance to talk to him. He's got a good head on his shoulders. Certainly, he's still young, but he's going to figure it out. Assuming he stays healthy, he's got a bright future for sure.
All right, Penn State fans, that's going to do it for this episode of the Blue White Breakdown. You can watch it on video. You can just listen to it wherever you get your podcast. Max, even though it's still kind of preseason, we still got a busy week. This is Monday. Tuesday, there's an availability with James, probably, hopefully. So a couple of players, a couple of coaches, I believe. I don't want to jinx it, but we could even hear from Penn State's athletic director, Mr. Kraft. And then, we got you're gonna have hopefully with Johnny live on Thursday. We might pop in another solo pod or two if we get a chance, depending on what we glean from Tuesday's availability. Once Saturday comes to pass, I always consider Sunday almost to be the start of a Penn State football week. James's Monday news conferences traditionally do it, but I just think we're going to be pretty busy just every day of the rest of our lives until like sometime in January. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I know you're looking forward to it. Johnny McGonigal, who's covering Penn State and the Eagles, is looking forward to it as well. Joe Hermit is. But Max, good chatting with you. Have a productive week. I think we'll be in a staff meeting shortly, but always good talking with you, Max.
Absolutely, Bob. A great podcast. You really have a knack for coming up with things to talk about throughout the off season. It's a gift. It's a gift. You should be proud.
I'm going to pat myself on the back right after I sign off. I promise.
I believe it. But yeah, the marathon starts this week.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you soon.